Please welcome your panelists for How the Next Generation is Redefining Social Impact, moderated by Director of the Milken Institute's Center for Strategic Philanthropy, Maura Donlan.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the discussion, How the Next Generation is Redefining Social Impact. I'm very fortunate to be here with an amazing rock star panel, and I have to say, I think this will be one of the most important panels that will happen at Global Conference, because we'll be discussing some of the most important issues our world is facing today, and we have some folks here that are putting together some really creative, positive, and transformative solutions to some of these issues. So I'm just going to let you know who we have. On our far right, we have Simone Friedman. She's Head of Philanthropy and Impact Investment at EJF Philanthropies. And to my immediate right, John Kluge Jr., co-founder and managing partner of Alight Fund. And then to my far left, we have John R. Seydel, who is Director of Sustainability of the Mayor's Office of Resilience of the City of Atlanta and a trustee of the Turner Foundation. And to my immediate left, Suzanne Sinegal McGill, who's co-founder of the Rwanda Girls Initiative. So we've come here together today to talk about exactly how the next generation is redefining social impact. In other words, how are Gen Xers, Zennials, millennials, and Gen Z figuring out how to fix that mess that Jane Goodall explained to us this morning, that we are basically stealing our children's environment and future instead of allowing them to inherit it. And so what exactly do I mean by next gen? Well, usually I think in these conversations people just assume that it's millennials. But in this conversation we're actually casting a wider net and looking at folks, anyone basically below baby boomers. So just to kind of give a sense, I mean, I know that you've all see these categories and different places and different outlets have different classifications, but just to give everyone here a frame of reference, Gen Xers are born between 1965 and 1979. So right now they're between 39 and 53. Zennials, which is a relatively new category, which I hadn't heard before, they're born between 1975 and 1985. So that means that they're between 33 and 43. And then millennials, and so we have a millennial here on our far left, are born between 1980 and 1994. So they're between 24 and 38. And then there's two others after that. There's Gen Z, that's born between 1995 and 2012. And then there's Gen Alpha, so very young, and they're 2013 to 2025, so some of them haven't been born yet. So there it is. That is our breakdown. And so that made me think, if you were born in the year 2000, so that would make you a Gen Z, that means that you're turning 18 this year. And depending upon when you were born, that means that you can vote if you're in the United States, in the 2018 elections and the 2020 elections. And it also made me think, what is your world going to be like in 2050? So when you turn 50, what are you going to be seeing? Now, I know that we probably have a lot of futurists in this room. We have a lot of people that track these trends. So none of this is set in stone. But by the same token, whether you're a Cassandra or a Pollyanna, there are some things that we're fairly sure are going to happen. There'll probably be 9.6 billion people in the world. In the United States, we will be a majority-minority country. Sea level will have risen by at least a foot. Demand for food will have increased by 70%. 1 in 5 developing countries will face water shortages. 70% of us will live in urban areas. And following on one of the themes of today, if the sixth extinction proceeds apace, we will have lost half of our world species by then, by 2050. So before I depress you all, which I don't want to do, I'm now going to turn you to these people who are going to help all of us figure out ways that we can make the situation better. And I'm going to start on my immediate left with Sinegal McGill, who's been doing some amazing work in Africa, which happens to be the youngest continent in the world, where 65% of the people, I think, are under 25. And you're working in Rwanda. So I was hoping first just kind of opening up the question about how you're working to make a social impact, how you're defining it, and tell me a bit about your project.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with everybody. And I guess the way I would describe, first of all, our strategy is that we've gone all in completely on one issue that we feel passionately about, which is girls' education. And for many of the reasons that you just listed, there's mountains of evidence out there that says that girls' education is probably the single best tool that we have to address some of the most pressing issues that we're facing in the next 50 or next number of years. So we became very passionate about that. But backing up just a little bit to education, my family, my parents were the first in their family to go to college. And they feel passionately about education, and that's always been a priority in our family, and certainly with our family's philanthropy. So with that at the core of who I am, and feeling so lucky myself for what I've had the opportunity to have in my own children, a friend and I had decided we wanted to do something to support education in sub-Saharan Africa. We didn't really know what that would be, but we wanted to do something. And around the same time, I ended up in Rwanda with my father, who was working for Costco, and Costco's buying about 30% of Rwanda's coffee exports. So we went initially to see what they were doing with the coffee farms and to improve the quality and use them as a means of reconciliation. And I came back from that trip and said to this friend and I, the friend that we were thinking about this, I said, I was so surprised by this incredible tiny little country in the middle of Africa that has the potential, I think, to be a model on the continent of what's possible with low corruption. It has one of the fastest growing economies in the world. It has the world's first female majority parliament. Really, really interesting, exciting things going on there that we could potentially do something there and make an impact and sort of create a model within the model of Rwanda to have greater impact. So she and I went back. We did a lot of listening to what the need was from everyone from the Ministry of Education all over the country. And what they told us was to focus on secondary school for girls in STEM. They're hoping to be a knowledge-based economy, and that was what they identified as the greatest need. So it was a much larger scope than what we had anticipated, but realized no one else was doing what they were saying the need was, so we needed to create it ourselves. So we went ahead and developed and built a secondary school for girls, a university prep focused on STEM, and thought, what if we create this amazing model of excellence that takes away every possible obstacle, give these girls every chance, and then launch them and see how they can become the leaders of the continent. So we have had 5 graduating classes. The school opened in 2011. We have 275 girls at the school at any given year. 5 graduating classes with students now studying in 19 countries around the world in colleges and universities. We have at least 1 student at every Ivy League school. These young women are phenomenal, with over $30 million in financial aid that they've earned, which is just incredible. And I think, so for us, when we look at social impact, of course, because we've gone deep with the students that we're working with, we look at the impact on those individuals for sure and their families. But I think what's been really exciting for us is looking beyond that. I'm very proud to say that I think the success the school has had and the students have had has changed the culture of educating girls in Rwanda and has changed the conversation. And we partner with the Ministry of Education, so there's lots of conversations and shared learnings and best practices so that the things that we're learning in our sort of innovation lab about what's possible, that can be spread more widely throughout the country. And so that's been thrilling for us to be a part of. And I know that those girls are going to go on to be the change makers, not only in Rwanda, but on the continent, which is exactly what we need for all the reasons you just mentioned.
It's up to them. Is this working now? What's going on? Sorry. Is this working? Okay, now it's working. Thank you. No, that's wonderful. And your first college class is graduating in May, right?
Yes, this spring.
So congratulations.
Exactly. Thank
That's really
you.
exciting.
Thank you.
So now I'm going to come to you, John. And you, in spite of your young years, have had a very peripatetic and intrepid career. You've been all around the world and doing some amazing stuff. So I'm going to open up to you now because I'd like to ask you a little bit about the work that you're doing in the refugee space broadly, and then we can get more specific later.
Sure. Thank you, Maura. So refugees, I think about how did I end up getting involved in global forced migration. And for that, I have to blame my wife or thank her. Christine Mahoney is a professor of public politics at the University of Virginia. She is the author of this book, Failure and Hope, Fighting for the Rights of the Forcibly Displaced. Always got to plug Christine. And she spent a decade studying genocide and forced migration because she wanted to study one of the worst problems in the world and see if there are any solutions. What Christine found was that by and large, when we are talking about people who've been forced to flee their homes from violent and armed conflict, most of them are not going home, and most of them are not allowed the basic rights to work, to move, to open a bank account, all the fundamental things that make life pretty simple and easy for the rest of us, or at least functionable, and gives each of us a chance to take care of our families. This was incredibly profound for me because I think about my parents, my mother and my father, both of whom are immigrants to the United States. My father, who grew up in war-torn Germany, came over in 1922, and my mother, who fled Iraq after the revolution in '58. If each of them had not had that opportunity to rebuild their lives in another place, I wouldn't be here on this panel. And so, the power to not only get out, but also to get up is profound. And I think that forced migration is the crisis of our time and our generation. It may not be as present on our shores here as something like climate change, but it is coming. And if we think about the Syrian crisis and all of the statistics that you shared with us in your opening remarks about the dynamics of the world today and where they're going, Syria is going to look like a garden party if we don't change how we address this issue. So for me, it is urgent, it's enormous, but failure is just kind of where we are, which is a great place to start because it means we have a lot of progress we can make. And so
It's only place but up is what you're saying?
that's right. That's right, hopefully. So I am a total optimist here. I think that Christine and I went to a summit in Turkey 3 years ago, and what we found was that the humanitarian system was both broke and broken, and there was a call for the private sector to step up and to help lead solutions. And so we are now kind of leading a network of investors and philanthropists together who are looking at economic development solutions for forced migration, meeting people where they are at and supporting both the communities that they're living in as well as themselves. So investing in refugees, investing in businesses that are employing them, investing in host country entrepreneurs as well.
That's great. Thank you, John. Really appreciate it. Now, John, I'm going to come over to you now.
All right.
And I know that we have a lot of things that we can discuss, but first I'd like you to open up and explain a little bit about maybe who Captain Planet is, if that's okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Talk about how Captain Planet makes a social impact, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, definitely. And so I know it's 5:15 right now, and I know it's been a long day for everybody. So thank you for all being here. And I'm glad that we can have the young people on stage right now because I feel like we're bringing the thunder. And so I want to make sure that everybody has energy and keeping the energy high because that's when you're able to retain that amount of information. So yeah, Captain Planet. Just giving some background, my grandfather, Ted Turner, he created a couple channels that you might have seen on TV a couple times, CNN and TBS, TNT. The most significant thing that he ever did for me when I was growing up, one of the most significant things was creating the show called Captain Planet. It was an animated TV show that had 5 Planeteers from 5 different continents. And back in the day when the Soviet Union was around, it was the Soviet Union, South America, the United States, as well as Asia and Africa. And basically, they're working together on solving these massive problems, whether it's people think that Captain Planet is just focused on pollution, and that's just not true. They talked about these issues that it's really hard to talk about for a 6-year-old. Poverty, racism, nuclear warfare, and did it in a digestible way where it's not just like, all right, that's a thing that's happening in your planet, and then you're gonna have a fictional cartoon character come and save the day. No, he did save it in the TV show, but at the end, it's like, well, these problems still exist, and this is what you can do about it. So he'd fly in, planetary alert, 30 seconds, here's an action item, or a couple action items, and the power is yours. Get it done. And so really, Captain Planet now is trying to do Captain Planet Foundation. My mother, Laura Turner Seydel, who's on our family board, the Turner Foundation, as well as leads the Captain Planet Foundation, is really focused on education. I know that's been covered with STEAM curriculum, really adding the experiential learning. Turner Foundation is focused on restoring and protecting our natural systems. Captain Planet is focused on boots on the ground, whether it's Project Learning Garden, where you're actually working with children to create these gardens where it's not just learning how to grow the food, but also how you interact with bugs and dirt and things that a lot of kids might think are a little bit scary today. But when you grow your own food, you harvest your own food, and you can't, it's so hard to get them to stop them from eating it before they have to, because they want to use it to make like their own favorite dish, whether it's pizza,
Yeah, they want to see
pasta.
what it tastes like.
Yeah, they want to see what it
exactly.
tastes like. And I
Exactly.
know for me, that's really important. But so that's kind of a background on me, wearing 3 hats today, but I know I'll get to the other hat.
Yeah,
in a
and
little bit.
all of them are very important to this discussion, so we'll come back to the other ones later, but thank you,
I'm looking
John.
forward to it.
Exactly. So now I'm going to come over to Simone. So Simone, you've actually also been on kind of a journey, right, where you have kind of tried different tools in your toolbox. So I thought I'd just kind of open up and ask you, which tools are you using now for your social impact, and what do you think is the most effective?
So before I took over managing our family philanthropy, EJF Philanthropies, I was an entrepreneur, and I had an analytics company. And so the approach that I always take is problem first, that this is a problem that we want to solve, and then these are the different ways that we can potentially solve it. And so I took that same approach to how we're dealing with the philanthropy. And specifically right now, we're very, very engaged in the food system, really trying to figure out how is what people are eating having an impact on those problems that you spoke about? Because what you mentioned at the beginning with what the world would look like in 2050, with the water issues and the species loss, a lot of that, people don't even realize, a lot of that is affected by what people eat, especially in particular meat, actual animal protein. And so one of the things that we're doing right now is we're trying to think about how can we think about other alternative proteins, plant proteins, better meat reduction, better meat, different kinds of options. And so right now we're actually doing a lot of we're throwing a lot of tools at it. I mean, we're doing grants.
Lots and lots of tools.
Yeah, we're basically doing grants. We're doing impact investments. We're the thing actually that I'm very excited about is this idea that the market, that all of you as consumers, I mean, just as a show of hands, how many of you here are either thinking about reducing the amount of meat that you eat, or trying to buy better meat, or plant-based?
No meat.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, almost everybody here. That's amazing.
Your message is getting through.
Well, but so here's the thing. So the question that we were thinking about is, how do we actually expand this message and really create a groundswell of consumer demand and consumer support for other alternatives? And the thing that's very exciting to us is this power that we've noticed is this power of film, the power of documentary film in particular, to potentially really spur consumer demand, because consumers are really what the key is, we think. And so what we're doing is we're funding a major, there's a documentary that's coming out in June called Eating Animals. The filmmaker Christopher Quinn is here in the audience, and we are very excited about this film because we think that it potentially will provide the momentum to really get to really spread this message to a lot of other people about why the food system is broken and how individual people can make a difference in what their choices are.
And it really is phenomenal. To that end, we actually have a clip that we can show you, so you can get a sense. And it's coming out in 1 month?
It's coming out in the mid-June.
Mid-June, okay. So can you run it now, whoever's running these things?
you come across these steel masterpieces, all brought together in the most ingenious ways to produce more and more.
Is this farming? I say no.
This is breeding 50 years ago. I spent days and months taking care of those birds in the pasture.
The basics that I'm using today is passed from one generation to the next. It's a way of life rather than going to a factory, producing protein units.
There's no way you can love an animal that has been genetically engineered to die in 6 weeks.
There's inherent cruelty in that system. I started documenting things I saw or things I heard about. It was time to pull the trigger.
It's against federal law to have cameras.
You can't shut down an individual's right to know about what this industry is doing. There's got to be a stop.
There's no future in this method of raising food. So I believe you're going to see more traditional type livestock production.
The demand is there.
I think we're going to see massive shift over to the plant-based technologies. It's healthier and environmentally sustainable.
If we're going to change this system, there needs to be a place for farmers to come and relearn this again. This is my mission, fighting to keep something alive.
So I recently was fortunate enough to see a screening just 2 days ago, and it really is phenomenal. I highly recommend it. But it's really interesting, how many times have we heard the word system, both on this stage and in that one clip? And so it brings up a point which I'm sure many people in this room are familiar with, whereby people are understanding that the way to make real change, to affect real change, is to find those leverage points, those root causes within the system, and figure out the right way to move them such that you can really make a difference. And I just wanted you to, if it's possible, to give a better sense about the food system, because I think it's a really useful way to understand how that one system can make such a big difference in so many different sectors.
Well, you know, the food system is extremely complex. There's a lot of factors that go into it. It has there are environmental factors, health factors. There are lots of different individual interactions. And one of the things that I'm sort of the underpinnings of how we're approaching our philanthropy is this idea called emergent philanthropy, which is actually based on the concept of emergence, which comes from complexity theory, in the sense that whenever you have a very complex system where new patterns emerge from different components of the system interacting together, it's very, very hard to predict what the outcome is going to be. So an example would be like tracking a hurricane. You know, like that's a complex system. And so the food system, because there's so many different elements that go into this, it's really one of these very complex problems, and it touches everybody's life every single day. And it's what we've decided to do is, because we don't really know exactly what that trigger is going to be to actually create the change that we want to see, is that all we can really do, and this is something that we're trying, is to find what's called the attractors. So find those elements within the system that will actually be forces for momentum. So something that will actually we're not sure exactly what it is, but something that will actually trigger people and potentially create an acceleration of change. And when we saw the film for the first time in full, and when it premiered last year at the Telluride Film Festival, we said to ourselves, this is really something that could be one of those attractors. I mean, you have the fact that it's an amazing film, but you also have the fact that Natalie Portman is associated with it, and she's not just associated, but she's extremely committed to it. And and she feels this is really a work of love for her. And so we thought, this is something potentially that could really maybe make a difference. And so what we're doing philanthropically is we're throwing a lot of money at actually trying to get the film seen by as many people as possible. So we're working, it's a very unusual kind of relationship. We're working directly with the distributor, IFC, as well as a organization called Pro-Social. Meredith Blake from Pro-Social is here. And we're basically, we're funding a series of theater buyouts all across the country. We're funding premiere events, we're funding Q&As, and what our only goal is to really get as many people as possible to see it. We're not trying to say this is the outcome that we want, this is what we're doing. We just want people to see the film because we think it can be that attractor.
Yeah, and so, and we'll talk about kind of the value of advocacy in a little bit, but I wanted to actually go to you, John, and talk about attractors and kind of looking at the systems that you're working with. Can you explain to me what attractors you've been gravitated to and what you're trying to do?
Sure. I think that when you think about a problem, the more you understand about it, the more you realize that it is made up of a series of smaller problems. Each have their own complexities to them, which if you like puzzles, it can be can be interesting, but it also makes it challenging. So what I found with migration is that this is a problem made up of many other problems. Every migration or displacement context is unique from every other one. And the solutions that are required at a very specific or intervention level are almost like a Rubik's Cube, where you need to have access to different tools and resources. From our perspective, we're talking about different kinds of capital from across the capital returns and impact continuum. And you have to be ready to adjust them and make sure that they fit appropriately with that specific issue or context that you're trying to solve for. So we have changed our focus a number of times. We started thinking we were going to be a single fund, sort of a fund of funds to invest in microfinance institutions across the world where there are large displacement crises. But what we found was that most microfinance institutions wouldn't lend to refugees. In fact, no one would. Not when we started. So last year, and part of that was because of perception of extra risk. Refugees will leave at some point, so why should we invest in starting their businesses? It could have been a cultural bias. It could have also been a concern from that MFI that their central bank, often having anti-refugee biases themselves, might shut them down. So we partnered up with Kiva, and we launched something called the World Refugee Fund, which was the first global fund to offer microfinance to refugees. It was a 0% interest fund, which is how Kiva works. Right. But the point of that was to offer sort of risk-free R&D capital to these MFIs to start testing whether or not this worked. And they have now lent almost $5 million.
And what ended up happening?
So $5 million successful loans have been repaid through over 6,000 different refugee entrepreneurs in over 5 countries.
Sure.
Woohoo! As a start. So, but the really interesting thing is that what Kiva and our partners have found is that refugees make better customers than local entrepreneurs. Their repayment rates are higher, averaging around 99.3 to 99.6%. That's almost perfect repayment rate.
That's amazing.
So if we can start onboarding those MFIs to take on more capital that can pay out real interest, maybe 4 to 6% to investors, then we can start to change the calculus from seeing refugees as people who are, burdens or in need of emergency response to people that are actively contributing to those communities and actually delivering returns to investors.
That's phenomenal. Good job. Seriously. John R. So the complexity piece brings me to a really interesting project that you're directly working on, which is Resilient Cities in Atlanta. And I'm not sure if everyone knows about this project, but if you don't, you should. And John R. will give more information about that. So can you give us a sense? But I also love how complex it is and how many parts there are to it. It's not just climate change.
No, it's not. And in fact, we've talked a lot. Education, we've talked refugees, we've talked food systems. If you look at the overview of what we're looking at by 2050, climate change is just one piece of the pie, but that's going to create 200 to 250 million more refugees. And where are they going to go? They're going to go to our urban areas. Education, and you're not going to have a resilient city without a resilient food system. Let's be real. And we need to produce 70% more food. And the number one climate solution is women's education, which, by the way, is also not a burden on society. It is a real opportunity. So it's like yeah, exactly. We're changing minds here. We're changing entire perspectives. By the way, John, when that fund's set up, I'm definitely interested in getting more involved.
You could start today, man.
All right. Well, I was gonna save the action items to the end there.
The action items on the stage is perfect.
But yeah, so for the Office of Resilience, we're part of 100 resilient cities pioneered by the Rockefeller Foundation from not just cities in the United States, but around the world. And what we are is a platform where we can share best practices. And Rockefeller has also given a platform of partners that we can work with from, you might have heard of companies like Microsoft, and others, to really look at resilient solutions and have in-kind donated services or at a very low rate, so that we can create these scalable solutions, and then also scale not just to the other 100 resilient cities, but to other smaller and bigger cities from across the planet that address everything to make a resilient city, like girls' education, like how are we gonna deal with how are we gonna take the opportunity of having 200 million new, I don't even want to call them refugees, just new opportunities move into our cities, and how are we going to be able to create and give them jobs and give them the opportunities to be entrepreneurs, to be in this resilient food system. Giovanni is actually one of those companies that uses 50% of their employees are refugees.
Exactly.
And that's why I'm just an excited consumer about a company that has half of their employees that are refugees.
Well, it's interesting when you talk about Chobani, and also in your film where a guy said you can vote, you cast a vote 3 times a day when you choose what you eat. And so you have an incredible amount of power as a consumer. So now I have a book here that was written by this gentleman to my right, along with a few other people.
Co-written.
Okay. So it's called Charity and Philanthropy for Dummies, although it's for everybody, I think. But in it, I'm going to quote something that he says, following on to your theme, John R., where he says, countries with more gender equality are more likely to enjoy higher economic growth, and educated women are more likely to participate in the formal labor market and have higher incomes than their uneducated peers. So not surprisingly, Susie, I'm coming over to you now. And part of the reason is one of the things that you had mentioned, and I want to make sure everyone heard it, about Rwanda, and how Rwanda is a majority female parliament.
Yes.
It has the highest percentage. What's that percentage
It's
again?
64%.
64% women. And you're educating a lot of those future leaders as well. So I just want to drill down more into girls' education, because in addition to this, there's a book by Paul Hawkins called Drawdown, which also shows that it has a direct impact also on climate change, and not having the decreasing the fertility rate.
Right.
So.
Well, we were just talking about that actually before the panel started. I think that he listed as the number one.
It's the number one. Empowering women and giving them a position of power is the number one climate solution. That's also going to have all these other added benefits.
Exactly. Right.
Health and economics. Sorry.
And no, it's great. I mean, I think when we.
It's plus family planning. So educating girls in family planning, then it becomes.
That's the magical duo.
Yeah.
Right.
Thanks, Mom.
Which is what happens, but that's what happens when you educate women, right? Is that they actually make different choices about their family planning, which is part of the solution. So yeah, I mean, I think it's, obviously there's this great groundswell that's happening around girls' education and empowering women, that more and more people, when we first started, I'll be honest, it was kind of newer, and I was starting to hear things, but it was sort of newer research coming out, and so I was diving into it thinking, wow, I had no idea all of this research around what happens, your return on investment for educating a girl. And I think that as we got further and further into it, you realize, I mean, obviously there's the social justice component of it, that it is the fair and just thing to do to create equitable education for everyone. But it's so much more than that, and it's all these other things we're saying. And for economies like Rwanda, for example, and I may not have the exact number right now because it's changed, but if you imagine that there's about a $2,000 a year increase in a woman's income if she finishes secondary school annually. Wow. So if you say that in Rwanda there's 500,000 girls that are not getting an education, right? That's $1 billion to their economy.
That's the tweet, by the way, if anybody's doing that. Yeah.
I mean, it's profound what happens. And then additionally, again, in a place like Rwanda and so many other places in the world, that, it's been shown that when you have these women at the table, the countries are more stable. In all sorts of ways. They address issues differently. They bring a different voice to the table, less conflict. And so for me, obviously I'm passionate about what happens when you allow these women a voice, and the way they become problem finders, I think, is what we talk to our students at the school about. It's not just about solving problems, but actually being problem finders and seeking out where they are so that they can address them.
Exactly, and I'm imagining that through your process, you're able to kind of see the growth in the young woman and have her be a leader. And I was just wondering if you might have some anecdotes or some particular women that come to mind.
Oh, sure. Well, yeah, there's a number.
I know it's hard. It's like choosing your favorite child.
It is really hard to choose. Gosh. Well, I guess I would start. So we have a student named Yvonne who's at Harvard. She'll be graduating this spring. And she is just a phenomenal young woman who wants to go into global health. And addressing all of these issues that we're facing. And she was inspired because she had a friend when she was younger in elementary school, a friend who died of cancer. And there's no oncology department for children in Rwanda. Frankly, at the time, I'm sure there wasn't one anywhere for anyone. And so if you were lucky enough to be diagnosed, you would have had to go somewhere else to receive treatment. This child obviously did not and died. And so that became her passion. I will say that, and this is specific to our students and people in Rwanda, but there's this real interesting sense of what part can I play in the development of my country. So like her, for example, right? Like I want to be that person that helps to go back and become the first pediatric oncologist so that I can solve this problem. Very different, I'd like to say I was thinking of those things when I was 18, but I wasn't. Right. But really what part can I play in developing my community and my country and the continent? So
right.
Yeah,
so an amazing ripple effect all the way through. That's so great.
Absolutely.
So now I'm going to come back over to you, Simone, if it's okay, because I wanted to bring up a point where you were saying that you're looking at trying to find the attractors. You don't know which ones are going to pay off. So how do you deal with the metrics in that? Because everyone in this room, I'm sure, has had lots and lots of conversations about metrics. And so we're all trying to weigh that. And how are you working with that?
Well, we're actually not looking at metrics for this, believe it or not. And that's really amazing for me to say, because actually the name of my former company was Metrics Group. Okay. In the sense that I used to be...
So you're really stepping out of your comfort zone.
Yeah. I used to be very, very, very focused with the philanthropy when I first started doing this on have to measure exactly what the outcome is going to be. We have to know this. We have to find out exactly what we're doing. And I actually have to give my uncle Manny Friedman credit a little bit for this, in the sense that he said to me, sometimes you just have to take risks. Sometimes you don't know what's going to happen, right? And you can't always know ahead of time what you're looking for, or even what's going to happen. And it could be completely a failure. But I think that, that's, I think, what's very unusual, in the sense that I, as somebody who runs her family's philanthropy, that I have this ability to take these kinds of risks. Like I partner, I do this full time, more than full time.
Right. Double time.
But I partner with a lot of foundations and a lot of philanthropists all over the country, actually even the world. And I work with a lot of professional program officers, professional foundation directors, and they tell me all the time, I don't have the luxury of taking the kinds of risks that you do, because I have a board I have to answer to, or I am going to get worried about getting fired. Whereas for me, it's the kind of thing whereby I just feel so fortunate that, we can take those risks and we can try new things and see what's going to happen and, take a chance and put money into something without having a specific idea of what's going to happen with it.
Well, and to that end, one of the things that we were talking about, which also crosses over to John R.'s work, is environmental justice. So that is kind of part of one of the symptoms of this overall system, what's going on. So if you could talk a little bit about that, and then I'm going to bring it over to John R., and he can talk about his work in Atlanta.
So one of the problems that the film highlights is this problem of concentrated animal feeding operations called CAFOs, which is essentially another word for factory farms. And in North Carolina, there is a huge concentration of these CAFOs, special hog CAFOs in particular, and the people living around these farms are extremely poor, disproportionately minority, and the amount of pollution that comes out of these CAFOs it makes the quality of life for people living in those communities extremely difficult. And just a few days ago, or just recently, there were a group of people who got together and sued the company, Smithfield, that owned a lot of these CAFOs, and they won.
Oh, that's great.
And it's just an incredible victory. And I really think that it's the more that people really understand that this is not just a issue of animal welfare. It's not just an issue of greenhouse gas emissions for climate change, because that's true, but it's really truly a matter of people living near these places are really harmed, and it's not right, it's not fair.
Exactly, and that's moving over to a more urban example. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that you've been doing with vertical farming, et cetera, in Atlanta?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I was just jotting down some notes. So obviously, when you talk about justice, something that's been left behind in the environmental movement is the justice factor. When we look at the low wealth communities, those are the communities that have the dirtiest air, the dirtiest water. They don't have fresh food access. And in the case of Atlanta, many of these districts are actually paying around 10% of their disposable income per month on their energy bill. So I mean, that's 4 ways of keeping those brothers and sisters down and keeping them in that poverty trap. And so in Atlanta, with our clean energy, Atlanta committed to 100% clean energy. We were the 27th city to commit to that. 100% clean energy for 2025 for city-owned buildings and 2035 citywide. And everybody's like, woohoo! Because, though we were in the 20s, now there's 69 other cities that are doing it. And so we're literally laying out a pathway for other cities to get on board. But it's not just about the clean energy transition. In Atlanta, being one of the most inequitable cities in the United States, we're about making an equitable clean energy transition. And so a lot of that, 50% of our plan, is going to be about energy efficiency. How can we knock down a lot of those rates and a lot of that energy burden that I was talking about earlier? But just about food, dirty water, and dirty air. Dirty water, I mean, we're seeing it everywhere. Flint is a very good example of that. When it comes to the food justice and food access, just in 2010, 53% of Atlanta was considered a food desert. And that means within 0.5 miles of your household, you didn't have access to that fresh food. So, and these communities, they would have these gas stations that would sell cigarettes or highly processed Doritos. How do you expect your kids to be able to get out of high school, much less go to college and get a job, if they are spending their entire life drinking dirty water that's poisoning them, breathing air that's poisoning them, not having the type of food that allows your brain to develop right? And really, on top of it all, you're also spending 10% of your income on fixing these problems on your electricity bill every month. So, I mean, these are just 4 things that I'm focusing on because that's what we're working on at the city. But I'm proud to report that because the city of Atlanta was the first city to have an urban agriculture director. And his goal is to focus on how do we reduce that 53% to 25% by 2020 as far as food deserts in Atlanta. And right now we're at 36%. So this is a really good progress. Obviously, we have more work to go. In the long term, obviously, we want that to be 0% of food deserts in the city of Atlanta. And hopefully, we're painting a picture through our innovative urban ag projects for the resilience network that we're in with Rockefeller. So not just for the U.S., but internationally, on how we can solve these problems and bring everybody up in the process.
And so are you using the Sustainable Development Goals as you craft this?
Oh, yeah, well, the Sustainable Development Goals, I talked about the interconnectivity of resilience and sustainability and how it touches everything. The Sustainable Development Goals, it's funny because the city of Atlanta just got accepted to be the UN Regional Center of Expertise. So we're joining 159 other cities from across the planet and using, because the Sustainable Development Goals, everybody's on board because it's going to benefit everybody, but they're so up here. How do we create scalable and real concrete solutions? Well, that's what cities are for. You know, we're the experimental, scalable labs where if you can create solutions for sustainable development goals, you can share it within the other 159 city cohort that you have that shares similar demographics, similar challenges, similar problems. And so this is why it's really exciting. So yes, the Sustainable Development Goals are something that we are putting as a framework for a lot of our solutions. And more cities to join.
Exactly. That's great. And how about you, John? Have you been using the SDGs as a framework as you put your work together?
Well, I do have an SDG pin.
What do you know?
Hey.
I didn't even see that.
So, you know, the Sustainable Development Goals, if you look through all 17 of them, you're not going to find one on migration. But you will find one on elimination of poverty. You will find one on women and girls equality. You will find one on financial inclusion. You will find one on partnership for the goals, which in my mind is the only way we're going to solve any of these issues. And if you ask me, what is it that I do every day when I get up, and what have I been doing for the last 10 years, it's figuring out how do we partner better together to solve these problems.
Well, and actually, remember Captain Planet, by our powers combined?
Yeah.
And that was the only way that it could actually come to fruition. So,
making me tear up.
So exactly. Well, and now I'm going to use this to go to Susie. So let's talk about some of the partnerships, particularly what you're doing with the government of Rwanda.
Yeah, so with the bond and whatnot.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So one of the things, I mean, we tried from the beginning, again, trying to think about how can we create a different sort of model than, it's almost like a charter school in a way, in the way that it sits. It's a government-aided school, so we work within their system, but doing our own thing. And so we did things like we have a farm adjacent to the school as part of the revenue stream for the school, and also providing healthy food for cognitive development as well. But we started thinking about, again, our sustainability is obviously key for every nonprofit, and the challenge for every small nonprofit like us, that annual worry about your operating expenses and fundraising. And so about 5 years ago, we had learned about social impact bonds, or development impact bonds as they are in the developing world, and thought, gosh, you know, maybe this could be something that we might be able to do as another sort of innovative approach to philanthropy and private dollars coming in together. So we went down the path quite a ways. We actually met with President Kagame at the time. He was very excited about the idea, because if you know anything about President Kagame, you know he's always eager and very progressive in his thinking, and I think he saw the potential for this to apply to other sectors beyond just what we were doing, like agriculture and other things. And we talked to investors. Investors were excited. It was still sort of early 5 years ago here. I think maybe there were 5 or 6 only bonds happening here in the US at the time. But our challenge was that the government of Rwanda doesn't have the money to be the payer, as you know, those things are structured usually where the government that's saving the money is sharing the savings with investors. And so that was our hiccup, was trying to figure out who is the private payer or a consortium of payers. And we haven't given up yet.
Well, I was going to say, so this is a really good example of actually you failed, or you're learning.
Well, we're learning.
Yes, exactly. But you're using different income streams. So in other words, you charge tuition.
We do. So we have a sliding scale. Yep. So some of our students pay tuition, and then the other, about 20%, and the other 80% are based on what they can pay.
Exactly. And so you're trying to sort through exactly how you can keep it sustainable over the long term.
Yeah.
And so now in our final minutes that are remaining, I wanted to throw it out actually to the audience to see if people have questions to our panel and to the work that they're doing. I think we have people with mics who can do that. So anyone have any questions for our esteemed panel here?
Sorry if we come off a little bit aggressive. We're just passionate.
So we have a question here.
So I can't help but see the intersection between genocide and refugees, genocide victims and refugees, and the work that you're doing in a country that was badly stricken by genocide. So do you see an impact, do you see a specific impact on the girls that you're educating, since the genocide is still new, and the impact of it is still new and fresh in Rwanda?
Definitely. I mean, it's very present still there, even though technically our students would be that next generation. Our first class, we had some students in our first class who were orphans from the genocide, or whose mothers perhaps had died after because they'd been infected with HIV, as rape was used as a weapon of war. So that first class had some, but since then, most of them were all born after the genocide. But 24 years in history is not very long, and it is definitely very present in conversations. The national conversation around genocide there is that we are all Rwandan now, that you're not really supposed to identify as these different ethnic groups. And it is remarkable. I will say it's certainly not perfect, and I think it's naive to think that you would have perfect reconciliation or forgiveness. But it's one of the things that really strikes you when you're there is the level to which they have been able to move forward and forgive, because I think they realize that for mutual survival and growth that they need to be able to move on. And truly some of the stories of forgiveness and hearing our students talk about it, even if they weren't alive, their families were impacted. So hearing them talk about it and what it means for the country to be able to come together and move forward it's very moving.
So in other words, like the whole country has a level of maturity and appreciation, understanding with reconciliation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's, absolutely part of the national conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Any other questions for our panel?
So I believe very much in intergenerational learning. So I'm wondering how much of how you approach social impact you learn from the generations that came before you, and what you think those generations, your parents and Manny and et cetera, what can they learn from you?
I've learned a lot from my parents, my grandparents, on both sides. I'm still learning, obviously, as I referred to earlier. But I think people under the age of 35 now, more than 50% of the population. We also represent the majority, the biggest transfer of wealth in history, and then we also represent different values. It's not just what you eat, but it's also where your money's working for you, where it's invested, and what products you're buying or not buying. And this is the information age. So we have more information now, and we don't want to spend our money on things that are literally gonna kill us or kill our sisters, make our air dirtier, our water dirtier. It's mind-boggling. It's absolutely mind-boggling. So I think that's just one, but I'll leave it to.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll answer too. Everything I do, I feel like I'm doing it really to honor, generations that have come before me. I mean, that's every single day I think about it. Am I doing something that's going to honor not just my uncle, but also my grandparents and my whole family and our ethics and our values and what we really feel that's very important. And it's something that underscores or undergirds really everything that we're doing. And I in fact, so much so that I wouldn't even do anything that would be in opposition to that. I mean, it's absolutely core to everything that I'm doing, and I feel very, very fortunate to have that legacy to honor. So.
And John, I just wondered if you could say a little bit about your father, whose history was so interesting, and what you learned from him.
I think it's similar to Simone's comment. My dad was involved in over 200 different businesses over the course of his career. I think the investment that people made in him as an immigrant seeking an education and as someone looking to start a business paid off. He invested heavily in this country and his community. We don't really have a typical family business. My dad didn't really believe in having his children or other family members participate in his corporate entities. But we do have a family business in terms of what he valued most, which was, how do you make a difference in the world? And that is the legacy that that I'm working to carry forward. That's our family tradition. Maybe it's an inherited trait or a disease of some kind, but I think it's a good one.
It's very good. And Susie, your father also has influenced a lot of what you do, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, my parents, like I said, I mean, they both grew up in very working class families, and I think feel like, you know, hard work and a lot of luck changed the course of their life. And I was raised Catholic, so there's always a certain amount of guilt that just, you know, is just present.
To that.
But I think really it was definitely, my parents always said to us that, you know, as lucky as you are, you have a responsibility and really a privilege to be able to give back. And what way are you going to do that? What are you passionate about? It's what you're passionate about that you need to do, but find that passion, and you have a responsibility to do that. So and certainly their example influenced me in that.
So we only have a few minutes left, and I want our panel to go back and think again about 2050. And you can answer in one of two ways. Either what you would recommend the audience do in order to make the world so we can survive to 2050, and then it will be actually a Garden of Eden and not another situation, or what you think 2050 will look like. And it's just really up to you. Simone, I'll start with you.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about the food system, or specifically, specifically the meat. What will meat look like in 2050? I really think that we're going to have a situation where there will be a bifurcated market, whereby you'll have, or this is really what I hope, and I think this is what's really going to happen. You'll have at the very top this. There will always be farmers who are raising animals in the most humane way possible, doing regenerative agriculture, and you'll have very, very high quality meat. And then I think for everything else, you'll have clean meat, which is meat made from animal cells instead of animals themselves. That combined with plant-based meats are going to replace all of the factory farmed crap that's out there.
I love it. John?
Oh, man.
Can you match that?
I don't know. I'm going to try. I think we're at an inflection point. This is one of those places in life where we have a few different paths we can take. And the world could look very different depending on which path we choose to take. So one road leads us down a path where we bury our heads in the sand and pretend this is a problem that doesn't affect us, where we are reactive in our policies and our investments rather than being proactive. And that world looks very different. That's a world where there are 300 million more people on the move in economies all over the world. And that's pretty scary to me. And that's not the world I want. So the other choice is that we kind of keep on with the status quo. And I don't think that one's working out for us so well. There is thankfully a third road, which is what I'm recommending.
Sounds good. Tell us.
The third road is where every person, no matter who you are, what zip code you are in, what the color of your skin is, whether you're a man or woman or a child, you have a chance at a future where you can have a bank account, you can take care of your family, you can start a business if you want, or you can go and get a job. And no one is going to penalize you based on where you come from. That's the future that I want. But to get there, it's going to require us to all choose that path together. So capital is an instrument of justice. So I want you all to think about that. If you are in philanthropy, if you are an impact investor, if you represent an institutional investment fund, wherever you are on the capital spectrum, even if you are just a private citizen, your capital can be an instrument of justice. And if you want to put it to use, come find me afterwards.
Woohoo! Yeah, man.
Sounds good. So Susie, I'm going to come to you because I want to think about all the women and girls that you're educating and where they'll be in 2050.
Oh gosh. Well, I think that, how old will they be? I really firmly believe that they will be the leaders.
Leading Rwanda.
They'll be leading the continent,
yeah,
actually,
exactly.
because I think that based on what I know of them and the choices that they're making, they'll be the voices in Africa that we desperately need, that are focused on transparency and rule of law and bringing everyone up. And I'm optimistic. I mean, I know, as a woman sitting here, and obviously what we focus on, we're certainly not there yet, and there's still so many challenges for women all over, including our own country. But I'm really optimistic that there's this sea change happening, and that we're reaching a tipping point of people saying in all sorts of ways that we're all going to be better off if everyone's included.
Exactly, the power is ours. And John R., can you give us our closing comments on what 2050 will look like and how we can all get there?
Yeah, well, I'm optimistic because I know that our generation is hyper-connected, and we're just going to share best practices for all of what we're passionate about. My grandfather says save everything. So let's, I want to give just a couple of action items for everybody so that we can get to the shared vision that we have for 2050 that touches on what each of us talked about today. So one, vote. If you're 18, come on now, vote, be part of this change. For women, and not just vote, run for office. When you're 18, run for office. We need more young people expressing what their values are at not just the top level, but as well as our local institutions as well. And that especially for women, run for office. Number two, if you're afraid to give up meat completely, just try Meatless Mondays. All right, just try it. It's gonna do a lot of good. For people that are willing to go a little bit farther, go meatless completely.
Burgers are really good.
They are.
Yeah.
They are. And then. Sorry, the last thing, and I know I said it already, but divest from the things that kill us and invest in the things that are going to save humanity, save everything. And also, when you're talking about things like refugees, that's going to make us more resilient, more welcoming, more inclusive, and more united as a species, and just a high level of beings. And that's the inflection point is, are humans able to evolve at this point and make these decisions that are going to benefit everybody? So who's ready for a positive evolution of our species? I know I am. I hope you are too. The power is yours.
Thank you, John R.
Yeah.
And with that, we'll say thank you very much for coming, and have a wonderful night.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
There you go. Thank you, Maura.
That was fun.